Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to be back with you again, and I'm pleased that my staff, Dominique, has been attending all meetings and briefing me on the task force and all of the information that's there. So where I've not been with you in person, I have definitely had my staff and my resources paying attention and making recommendations and engaging me in the conversation concerning reparations. I want to thank the chair and those of you on the committee for the work that you've done. The dedication that you have to this effort is extremely important. And I want to thank you for serving on this committee, this task force. The work that you're doing, I know you know, will have a profound impact on all Californians and this nation as well. I've been contacted by many as a result as the author of AB 3121 concerning what we're doing, how far we've gotten, as well as what my intent was when I authored the bill and put it on the floor of the Assembly and the Senate and lobbied to get it signed by the governor. As you know, the national debate concerning reparation has been going on for approximately 40 years without clear resolution and improvement. Some cities have taken it upon themselves to bring the discussion and provide some compensation for many who have been adversely affected by slavery in their economies, as well as looking at the devastation that it has had on African American communities that has resulted in enormous wealth gap in this nation that will take decades to close if no aggressive intervention occurs. AB 3121 was a major milestone for California and this nation. California, I believed, and is the largest state in the union. It is the fifth largest economy in the world, and one of the and interestingly enough, one of the farthest states away from what we would consider the Deep South, the heart of Dixie. However, the information you have discovered in your hearing shows that even being as far away from Dixie as one could possibly get physically, California nonetheless has been impacted by the system of slavery, and those who live in California have been the victims of systems, whether it's Jim Crow laws or restrictions in housing or being placed in schools that were dysfunctional and so forth and so on, that there was no hiding place from slavery in this nation. And so it becomes important and even an example for the rest of the nation, hopefully to begin to look at themselves, because if California, as far as we were, if slavery was as pervasive here as it is across the nation, it says that clearly there needs to be a lot more work done in other states, and there needs to be a national effort at that. Some ask me, why didn't we do the national effort? And I had to say what so often has been said, how long, not long, can we wait for some resolution to the issue? Langston Hughes talked about waiting for things that are so long that before you know it, the dogs are biting at your door, because obviously others are still organizing against you as you make an effort to try to be patient, to be thoughtful, and to try to move an agenda. So it is important, as I've indicated to so many, when I authored AB 3121, that I realized that many of the issues that are going to be addressed in this bill have not been resolved. There are a lot of unresolved issues, but I realized that it would have taken a lifetime of conversation and discussion for me to resolve them all, and by then I would not have the opportunity to author this bill and get it passed in the houses. I always say we will not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If every system we has some challenges and some flaws and some issues that have to be worked out. If we solved all of those issues before we gave any unemployment check, we would have people across this nation suffering as a result of the virus, because it is an imperfect system. And yet there are many who may take advantage of it, but the vast majority will benefit from it. And so it was in that spirit that I did not make an attempt to solve all of the issues that people wanted me to solve. I listened to conversations from many, but I realized that there was no greater time and no greater opportunity than now for the bill for reparations to be brought to California and resolved here at this time, given the politics of California, given the efforts that I had made with so many strides in terms of getting ethnic studies and all those kinds of bills into California, that this was the time, and no better person than myself, because I have generally been relatively courageous about those issues that are important. and challenging to California to do so. So with that in mind, this is not a perfect bill. It's a good bill. And it requires from you the kind of conversation that needs to happen about who gets what. And so I want to share with you today my thinking and my conversation that occurred as I was authoring the bill, interacting with a number of communities and groups to help you understand what takes place. Slavery surely had an impact on the African. There is no question. Being denied access to one's worth, in other words, the ability to work and make money, kept generations of Africans in dire poverty. We provided free labor to this country for hundreds of years, and that had an impact upon us as a population, as a people. If you ever get a chance to listen to the voices of former slaves that were recorded in the 1930s as a result of the New Deal and efforts to come out of depression, there were a number of anthropologists who recorded the voices of those who had been slaves. And when you listen to it on the Smithsonian tapes, those tapes were basically ruined because of weather, but they kept them. And because of digitization, now we have the voices of slaves that we can hear. It is interesting as you listen to it that they say very clearly that when slavery ended, when slavery was no longer legal, they literally had nothing but the scraps on their back. They didn't own any property. They did not own any equipment. They owned no land. They had no sense of direction. So often they could tell the north and the south because of the sun and the things they'd heard, but they had nothing. They had no place to sleep, no place to stay. And as a result of that, most of them only had the skills of farming, which became the foundation for the sharecropping system. The few Africans who worked in the big house knew that they knew how to serve and how to iron clothes and how to wait on individuals. And they were the first ones who left because they knew when the research was done that they had sat in the big house and listened to the plans for sharecropping. And they knew it would be no more than another wave of slavery, a different kind of slavery. And so those who had skills left and went north. And they're trying to create for themselves a position of service in terms of having some level of business or working in houses because they knew how to do that. But the vast majority of them basically ended up being sharecroppers, the victims of a system that kept them forever poor. And I know that because my grandfather was a sharecropper, and my great-grandfather, who was born in slavery, was also a sharecropper, and my daddy was a sharecropper. And thus, when my family left in August of 1951, Arkansas, in the middle of the night, running from the Klan, it was because the sharecropping system was so brutal and was unrelenting, and therefore left him with nothing but poverty. The end of slavery also increased brutality to Blacks, so that those who suffered in slavery also suffered the brutality that existed. One researcher talked about the fact that when you were a slave, you had economic value. If anyone hit you, hurt you, or shot you, they would have to pay your master for your body, for what your labor would have been. But once slavery ended, you had no economic value at all, which meant anyone could shoot you, kill you, lynch you, burn you, and they owed no one anything for your life. And so that made Africans even more vulnerable as a result of the system that came into existence in terms of the Jim Crow laws that were there. So the ability to exercise your constitutional right to vote, the appearance in courts, the fighting back, were all tantamount to signing a death sentence for the average African. I could go on recounting the economic and the social indignities that were upheld and supported by the courts in this land. Those became the basis for discussion of who deserves reparations. Slavery was more than a physical condition. The psychological impact it had on the aspirations of Africans was promoted through open violence without protection of the law. Lynching and burning to keep Africans in their place caused generations to place limitations on one's ability to strive for excellence. My grandfather was in Arkansas during the Elaine, Arkansas riot. The killings lasted for weeks as Black men were hunted in the fields because they had the audacity to attempt to organize and collectively bargain for fairness at the sharecroppers. The fear of that, the killing of hundreds of Africans and hunting them down for weeks, was designed to create a sense of fear and limitation on the visions of Africans because there was no system to provide them with support. The fear my grandfather felt, I remember as a child, was palatable, and it crippled him and his family's ability to dream beyond the cotton fields. He was dearly, dearly, and direly afraid that his kids would be killed, his sons would be murdered, his wife would be raped, his daughters would have things done to him that he could not defend them. And that in itself created such a tremendous fear and psychological impact that Black people almost did not dream of anything other than mere survival. And that becomes important as we talk about the impact of slavery versus those who were never slaves, who came to this country from other places, who had aspirations and visions themselves. I often think about Barack Obama, and my theory is always that Barack Obama probably would never have had the aspirations to be president of the United States if one of his parents had been a slave. His father was an African, a Kenyan, who came to this country to go to school, and he was born of a white woman who also had dreams and aspirations of greatness herself. He did not have limitations and fears drilled in his psyche, and thus aspired to become the president of the United States. Reparations is designed to repair and heal the damage done to Africans for 400 years of slavery and Jim Crow. Recent immigrants do not share our common oppression at the same level. And I say this because I have numerous friends who are recent immigrants and a son-in-law who's a recent immigrant. They can trace their ancestors. My son-in-law is a Kenyan. And when we went to Kenya, we were able to see hundreds and hundreds of family members who could trace their lineage all the way back for hundreds of years. We visited the burial sites of his grandfather, who was one of the chiefs of the Kikuyu. And my grandkids had an opportunity to touch the hands of ancestors that went back for generations, and to see pictures and to visit grave sites. Things that I have limited knowledge of and access only go up until maybe 1870, but not to the depth as that my son-in-law experiences. Reparation is for those who are the descendants of slaves first, because of the devastation they suffered from hundreds of years of no wages and no ability to own land and accrue wealth. Their ties are permanently severed from their homeland, and their ability to return to Africa is almost impossible. They are truly, unfortunately, Americans. I am a living witness to that, having traveled to the continent for dozens of times over the last 30 years, have met and gone to see folks whose villages I'm supposed to know, have interacted supposedly with former relatives, and I come back each time happy that I went, but clearly aware of the fact that I am truly an American. That slavery stole from me my ancestry and my heritage. And no matter how I wear African clothes as I have, and many of you have been to my house to see my collection of fabulous African art, the reality I come back with every year is that I have nowhere to go but here. That is not the case for those who are immigrants in this country, who come here from Africa, who still maintain their ties and their relationships, who still own land in their homeland, in their country, and can always return and have for them a sense of pride and dignity about who they are and where they are. I remember once in reading a story of the author of They Came Before Columbus. And he was talking about him came before the Mayflower. And he was talking about being in Ghana when Ghana got its freedom in 1960, in the 1960s. And Lerone Bennett was talking about watching those around him crying at their freedom, their love for their country, and how he felt like such an alien in the world because his homeland had been stolen from him, but equally important, he had not been completely embraced here. And so he didn't have the same sense of love and tears that he saw. And he felt so much that he was left without a homeland and without a place. African immigrants freely come to the United States in search of a better life should not be eligible for reparations. Whether they found a better life or not, they could always immigrate back to their homeland and reestablish themselves with their indigenous families. The debate may continue, but there is one thing that I'm very clear about. Those who are descendants of slaves had and have the impact of that system living in them and either driving and altering their aspirations. Those who were free during that time frame also may be able to ask, basically, should be able to make their case about themselves, because so often, if you lived here in the 1800s or the 1700s and you were free, you still had the impact of slavery on your life. The ability to move, the ability to own property was often taken away. Many of you have seen the movie 12 Years as a Slave. If you were free, you had to validate your existence every day, and someone could take your identity card and tear it up, and you immediately became a slave. That your whole existence depended upon someone validating, that someone white basically arguing your case for you in terms of your freedom. So those who lived during the slave period, and even if they were free, were never fully free and did not have access to the resources oftentimes that they needed to maintain their life and to be free. So I'm very clear about a couple of things. One is that I would never have written this bill if I thought at some point in the process of providing reparations that I would look at the line, if there was such a thing as a look at the line, that those standing in line for reparations, and I would discover that those at the front of the line were those who had very limited, if any, impact at all from slavery. I would be very upset if I discovered that only those who had the resources, who had the greatest amount of information, who had been more prepared than others, found themselves at the front of the line. And those who suffered the most from generation to generation out of slavery, from poverty and lack of resources, would find themselves once again at the end of the line because they got the message late. We didn't do enough to basically help them to understand that they had been the victims of a poor educational system that did not prepare them for the university. And as a result, they did not benefit from it at all. Chemerinsky talks about it. I was reading in your last report, what my staff gave me, that he said it's an issue of not about being Black. It's an issue of descendancy and lineage, and he's absolutely correct. There will be many Black people who do not deserve reparations, but there will be many who, obviously, whose lineage, and they are Black, and their lineage clearly says very strongly that they deserve to have reparations. Reparations is about harm that has been done, its extent, and who basically should have that harm mitigated by some form of repair to that individual. So I hope I'm clear about what I meant at the time. We had conversations, and that's why one of the things talks about basically those who are descendants of slaves being handled first, and others may be secondary. Those others secondary are those who were impacted by slavery, who lived in the United States during slavery, who may have been free, but also had their visions limited because of the slave system itself that did not treat them equal. They were not treated as equal citizens. They had limited ability, and they also could become vulnerable as a result of the system of slavery. Those who came after slavery, who may have experienced Jim Crow, who may have done various things, came here with their lineage intact, came here with their resources intact, and came here oftentimes looking for a better life. We did not. We were kidnapped, brought here against our will. All of our past was taken from us, and we truly have nowhere else to go but here. Thank you.